7 o'clock, ladies and gentlemen. So good evening, everyone. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Jan Ledoux, and for my sins, I'm chairman of the organising group for the NSA Southeast Region's SHWAP conference. I'm only making a very brief appearance tonight, you'll be pleased to hear, just to clarify the change in speaker lineup. Due to circumstances beyond our control, Nick Cotter is unable to present tonight, but we have secured a more than able replacement in his fellow Irishman, Bruce Thompson, who will speak to the title, Managing Parasites in Their Free Living Environment. I'm delighted to welcome, to formally open SHWAP 25, Kevin Harrison, known to many of you, I'm sure, when wearing one of or more of his several hats as a Gloucestershire sheep farmer, chairman of SCOPS, and chairman of the NSA UK Policy and Technical Committee, not to mention a mean saxophone player, or a player of a mean saxophone, I perhaps should say it that way around. Kevin has also kindly agreed to chair this evening's session. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Kevin, to get proceedings underway. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. And I must say, I did enjoy reading your letter to your former self in the Sheep Farmer magazine this week, and I never had you down as a prawn cocktail, crisp-eating man. Says a lot about your taste. But there we are. Yes, people, thank you for joining tonight. The nights are drawing in. There's nothing on the telly, but fear not. The Sheep Health, Wealth and Production Online Conference organised by the NSA Southeast Region is back. And then for 3 consecutive evenings, we'll be joined by leading industry names to discuss a range of topics with the aim of arming sheep producers, advisors, vets and SQPs with the information and tools needed to enhance sheep farming enterprises to be healthy, productive and profitable. So congratulations on being here. You are the ones that can and will make the difference. With almost over 300 of you registered for these events. The best mandate is an informed mind. As Jan said, I'm Kevin Harrison. I'm PNT chair within the NSA. For those of you not quite sure how the NSA structure works, it's built of several committees, which sounds kind of worrying when you say the word committee, but they are really groups of farmers and people within the industry that help guide the board and those at HQ in what's happening on the ground and vice versa. So you have English committee, you have regional committees, devolved nation committees. So it really is a good, well-structured organisation to put forward the voice for the sheep farmer. Yes, I am a farm manager down near Bath as well. So yeah, let's get on with it. Whilst we're enjoying good trade and livestock values at the moment, there are many challenges being thrown our way. Emerging diseases, endemic diseases, parasite challenges, anthelmintic resistance, vaccine supply chains, lack of equivalence across UK nations, environmental pressures, increased costs, one-way trade deals, agricultural policy being destabilised by short-term party politics, legislation, just to name but a few. But looking at the positives, we must also reflect on how privileged we are to be able to work in this industry, to work the land we do and to farm the animals we do with the freedom we have. We must do the right things to protect ourselves, our businesses and the whole industry, whether it's locally, nationally or internationally. Let's use and prescribe medicines responsibly, keep good farm records, make the best use of vaccines available and plan ahead. Make the most of the professionals who are there to advise us and be grateful for all those working hard in the wings so we can farm sheep healthily, wealthily and productively. Whatever way you choose to farm sheep, do it well with attention to detail. So to help you with that, there are some great subjects on offer over the next 3 nights that will get your grey matter juices flowing. But don't forget you need to register for each night separately. There's also CPD points available too, 10 AMTRA points a day and 2 ROSA points each evening. So I'd also like to send out a big thanks to our supporters because this event wouldn't work without them. That's NoBACZ, British Wool, Rapper, Alanco, MSD, Biomedia and iLivestock. Our two subjects tonight are neonatal lamb management. What do we learn from the largest ever naval hygiene study with Emily? And then we have managing parasites in their free living environment with Bruce. Just some quick housekeeping. Please put your questions in the question box and we have an answer session at the end after both presentations. If you are claiming AMPTRA CPD points or ROSA CPD points, put your advisor number in the chat box now, and I'll come back to you later on to ask you to put it back in again, just to prove that you're still here. And at certain times, Bruce will be changing his glasses to different colour frames, so then I will ask you when he changed his glasses, and then you put your points in. And no falling asleep, toilets and fire exits, only you know. So we will crack on with Emily first. Emily graduated from the Surrey Vet School in 2020 and has worked as a farm vet in Hampshire, Sussex and Surrey for the past 5 years. She has always had a keen interest in sheep work, be that for commercial, pedigree or smallholder flocks. Emily is the flock health lead within her practice, part of the Vet Partners Sheep Working Group, and sits on the Vet Partners Farm Animal Clinical Board. Emily joined NoBACZ Healthcare as a technical services vet in May 2025 and now splits her time between NoBACZ Healthcare and her farm animal clinical work. Hello, Emily, welcome. Would you like to start sharing your screen?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the introduction and thank you everybody for attending. As you said, evenings drawing in. Just gonna hopefully do this the same as we did earlier.
Never as easy under pressure. Here we go, something's happening.
Excellent. How's that looking?
Yeah, you're away.
Excellent. Brilliant. So, as I said, thank you very much to everybody for joining this evening and for the very kind introduction from Kevin there. So, this is our topic for the first sort of half an hour of the session. So, chatting a little bit in general around neonatal lamb management, and then particularly focusing on this big study, which you might have heard about, you might not have done. So we'll start off just with some stuff around naval hygiene and a little bit of a focus around lambing, what the key pressure points are, and some of the points that we're trying to really reduce going forwards. And we'll go through the science and the evidence behind this product, and specifically the largest naval hygiene study, which is our big topic. And then we'll try and make this a bit more applicable and useful. So what does that actually mean for your flock? So why does naval hygiene matter? The stuff that we'll start with here isn't new information, but I think it is always useful to kind of recap and remind ourselves why we do keep, banging on about this, for want of a better word. So hopefully you can see from this diagram that we, at the point of a lamb being born, have an open navel, and that is represented here by this umbilical stalk. And hopefully you can see that that shows that we've got this communication between, the outside world, the environment, whatever that lamb's being born into, and all of these internal organs, and whether that is direct communication between the environment and the bladder or the liver, or the arteries and veins, allowing that communication straight through into the bloodstream. Hopefully it's fairly easy to see, and it also makes sense that that's a really easy way for bacteria to get into our lambs. And we know that bacteria can get in and it can track to those various organ systems that we talked about, and that can cause disease, and it can also cause mortality pretty quickly. And when we're talking about this, it's diseases that will be common to you. So things like endotoxemia or sepsis, your watery mouth, your classic navel ill, your joint ill, all of these are risks if we get that bacterial entry. Now, it would be remiss to talk about, naval hygiene or anything to do with lambs, really, if we didn't have a little moment about colostrum. It's not specifically relevant to this topic or really what NoBACZ do, but it's so important that every opportunity to bang on about it a little bit more, I think, is worth it. So as we know, there are no antibodies present in a lamb before birth. We have to focus on that colostrum to get those antibodies across from the dam and benefit for any of those vaccinations you've used if you've managed to get hold of them over the past year. Now, when we're talking about colostrum management, hopefully this is just refreshing some information for you. So we've got these cues that we have talked about, for as long as I can remember anyway. We want that quality to be, above 26.5 on your Brooks refractometer. We want to make sure our lambs are getting enough quantity of colostrum and within a quick enough time period. So within that first 2 hours, if at all possible. And then we want to make sure that everything is being done as clean a way as it can, appreciating it's a farm environment and there are things that, are not necessarily sterile, but we want to try and avoid getting those biofilms forming on all of our equipment and potentially look at things like tubing our triplets or freezing our excess to make sure that we're really prepared, because we know that that colostrum is incredibly important. Now, when we're talking about neonatal losses at lambing, what are the specific areas that we know are potentially concerns? So AHDB targets that we should, at the moment, our very best flocks are getting 10 to 12% lamb losses from scanning to rearing. And half of those losses come in the first 48 hours of life, and another 10% come in the first 14 days. So you've got 60% of all losses in our neonatal lambs between scanning and 14 days of life. Now, what causes this? Obviously, we know there's a variety of things that can cause, losses either pre-lambing or once you've got lambs on the ground. But one of the really key things are these neonatal lamb diseases. And it's not just mortality. Obviously, that is not ideal, but we also see these diseases which can have a really significant impact in our flocks. So things like joint ill and navel ill, we can see prevalence within a flock of up to 50% easily if you're really unlucky and everything goes against you one year. So if we have got real issues with these diseases, there's various things that we should be focusing on. And as I'm sure we would have seen if we asked every one of you to chat to us a little bit about your setup, every farm is different. So for some people, that's focusing, on pen management if you're lambing indoors. Some it's really focusing down on that colostrum quality. And obviously there's been a real push for that in the last couple of years. Some it's just trying to get that neonatal care, as spot on as we can do in terms of colostrum in, navels cared for as appropriate. And there's another appointment point here that I didn't feel like we could miss. We know that as an industry, farming has made significant progress. I've been graduating for 5 years, and even just in that time, the conversations we're having on farm are very different and the awareness is very different. So we have come a really long way in terms of reducing that prophylactic or sort of preventative use of antibiotics. And a lot of that has come down to partly, things going off the market that we potentially used to rely on a little bit as a sticking plaster, but also a real focus and push on things like colostrum quality and the enutrition that comes into this. And a lot of farms have made really good progress with that. But equally, we need to keep that going. So there's this kind of mentality now that maybe hygiene is the next step. We've made sure that hopefully our ewes are in the fittest condition they can be going into lambing to produce that really good quality colostrum. But actually now we need to make sure that the lambs, once they hit the ground, are having the best care. Now, we know that weather has a massive impact. Spring 25 was very, very different to spring 24. And we know that when we have a wet lambing season, that has a big impact on our lamb health and survival. And that really tells us that if we can optimize that hygiene control, if we can make sure those lambs are coming into the best possible environment, that could really maximize our success. Now, one of the key reasons for wanting to include something about antibiotic usage is that even though we know as an industry we have made really good progress, there was a study in 2024 which was basically a survey going out to farmers. It was voluntary whether they replied, and they got responses from 322 farms. And that came back that of those, 19% used prophylactic antibiotics, so those sort of preventative antibiotics, in an aim of preventing diseases like joint ill, navel ill, and general neonatal mortality. And that's not as high as it would have been, in some years, but it's really too high for where we, need to be looking at going forwards from a antibiotic resistance kind of responsible use point of view. And also we know that regulations are changing and getting kind of strengthened year on year. So what can we do against this? Well, we know that rapid disinfection and drying of a navel is a really key way to preventing entry. If you think back to that first image we have, if we can stop that patent tube basically connecting your environment to your abdomen, then we can prevent that bacteria getting entry. Now, rumour, which you have hopefully heard of, they had a task force in 2022, and they had 3 key areas of concern for sheep. And one of those was focusing on the treatment of lambs against neonatal bacterial infections, particularly watery mouth and joint ill. And we do know that good hygiene reduces the use of antibiotics. So hopefully this potentially is one extra thing you can add into your toolkit. So what is NoBACZ navel? Where did it come from? Now, traditionally, I don't know what you're using on your flocks at home, but strong iodine is what we were taught to use at uni. It's what we've been preaching about, you know, for as long as we've been preaching about what we should be doing with our navels. And it is very traditionally used, but there are known limitations to this. So the effect is potentially more short-lived than we'd expect. These 2 images are iodine that's been applied onto a plate of gelatine when it was first applied, and then the bottom image is 30 minutes later. So you can see how quickly that colour has disappeared. We know that there are issues with it being licked off, and you get those views that are incredibly frustrating and can cause all manner of problems with that umbilicus. Some flocks really struggle just seeing who's been dipped and who hasn't, and for some people, the human health considerations of iodine are really not brilliant. You know, it can cause really nasty chemical burns and an irritation on the skin. Now, all of that sort of compounded in 2022, 23. I don't know if you remember that spring with the massive iodine shortage due to, you know, potentially a factory in China ceasing production, which made iodine very hard to get hold of and very, very expensive. And in a lot of ways, that price hasn't necessarily gone down as far as you would have expected. So we know that strong iodine and that 10% iodine is traditional. It's worked for a long time. We like it. Most people are using it, but it's potentially not perfect. So in 2023, in a response to that, you know, big supply and price issue that we mentioned, there were conversations going on within the industry, particularly, you know, with a lady called Fiona Lovett, who you may have heard of, who then was working on a PhD and then approached NoBACZ Healthcare to try and apply the study and the technology they knew about from a liquid barrier point of view into something that could be applied as a naval product. So that is where NoBACZ navel was created. And the aim was to create an ultimate naval protection. And thankfully, the study that we're about to talk about did show that this had really, really good results. You know, initially we went into this hoping that this might be a product that was equally as good as iodine, so that if we had a massive shortage again, or potentially it went off the market completely, there would be an alternative, because we know how important it is. But it was very nice to see that it did have really impressive results. So I'm just going to run you through quickly what we're talking about when we say NoBACZ navel, because I appreciate it is a slightly unusual term if you haven't heard it before. So the product itself is what we call a blend of shellac and metal salts in an ethanol base. And this has various different features to it. So the ethanol provides that rapid drying and cleansing when it's applied. The shellac is a natural polymer, and that combines with the metal ions, and it forms a durable, non-colonizable waterproof barrier. And those kind of words you'll see going forward in this presentation. But really what that's doing is forming almost a liquid barrier over the site where it is applied, which is waterproof and which is not going to let any bacteria through it. It is a patented product, and those are these really key features that we were really pleased to see. Now, as well as those, it also has some other things that were added. So it has a bitter agent in it. And actually, anecdotally, people really do say that they don't see ewes licking it off and cows licking it off. And it's also got a really strong blue dye. So if you get it on your hands, it's going to stay there for a little while, much like iodine. But it just means it's really easy and visible to see where it has been applied. It's also food and feed grade safe. So you don't have to, remove the product once it's applied. There's no withdrawal rules. There's no, there we go. No withdrawal, no need to kind of be worried about where that's going off. It is antibiotic free, it's sustainable, all the production is as sustainable as we can make it. And it's currently available through vets or through the trade. So there's various places you can get it. So moving on to the technology behind it and what kind of gives it these key features. Now this graph on the slide is what we call the chicken strip experiment. So our scientists at the lab in Cambridge took a strip of chicken and dipped it in various types of product, and they then hung it up in a fume cupboard for 6 hours. And effectively, they weighed the chicken at the start and then weighed it over 6 hours to look at the percentage weight loss. And that's our sort of proxy for the desiccation and the drying of the chicken strip, which is our version of a navel. So you can hopefully see on here, on the far left of your diagram, you've got the control, which is nothing, so that black. Moving over to the blue, that's our NoBACZ navel. The orangey brown is 10% iodine, so your classic strong iodine. We've then got a combination of chlorhexidine and ethanol, so Hibby scrub plus surgical spirit effectively. Then a copper sulfate mix, which we knew some people were using, and we got a few homemade recipes from farmers to test. And then this last one is a copper and zinc chelate. And really what this showed us was that NoBACZ navel, in comparison to our others, provided quite significant faster desiccation. Over those 6 hours, the desiccation was increased by 51% compared to doing absolutely nothing. The iodine increased it by 22%, so that NoBACZ was 2.5 times better in terms of desiccation. Now, the advice has pretty much always been that you should double dip, and some iodine products and some other products will say that as well. And that is, what people recommend as best practice. Anecdotally, people have come back and said that they've actually not needed to. And there's various factors on the farm that will impact that in terms of, how wet your area is, but people have come back and said that. Now, moving on specifically to the big study, which you may have seen things about. This took place in December 23 to April 24, and there have been various bits and pieces coming out into the press. Now, this was a randomized controlled trial. Now, what we mean by that is that we completely randomly allocated the product that the lambs in this trial received. And it was the largest, or it is the largest ever naval hygiene trial or study that has happened so far. So the basic premise behind the study was that it was run in conjunction with Flock Health Limited, so you can see Fiona Lovett there on the slide, and it took data from just over 6,800 lambs from across 11 flocks. Now, all these flocks were lambing between December 23 and April 24, and they were all lambing indoors. Now, we wanted to get this quite early in the season, so that's why it's that particular time period that was picked. But this chart here, you won't be able to see the details, but this is effectively all of the lambs that came into this study. So the flocks that we looked at averaged around 450 to 500 ewes, and the range in ewe numbers was between 80 and 1,700. So it was a really representative study in terms of a commercial picture, and those were flocks across England and Wales. Now, what you can hopefully see on this diagram is horizontal blue lines and horizontal iodine lines, and each horizontal line is one farm, and this is just showing you the number of lambs born on that farm that were given either NoBACZ navel or iodine at birth. So all we did was we asked the farms to do exactly what they would normally do in terms of dipping or spraying and time periods, but every other lamb just alternate. So, the first lamb born got NoBACZ, the second got iodine. And what this meant was that you would get really nice results in terms of, your twins born, each one that had the same genetic background and all of that would have one product versus the other. So we didn't want to change what they were currently doing, but because we needed data, there were some other, things that we needed to be able to get from them. So all of these flocks needed to be recording information already. We weren't asking for a lot, but they effectively needed to be tagging lambs within 48 hours so that we could follow them through. We needed birth weights and your sort of 8-week, 56-day weights. And we ideally wanted them to be recording incidents of lamb disease and mortality. That one always goes slightly to the wayside as lambing progresses. So we ended up with about 25% of all lamb deaths in this time period having sort of good data and reasons for. But really what we wanted was those birth weights and those 56-day weights. So effectively what you'd want if you were signet recording. So now the really important part, what did we find when we looked at overall mortality? So I've got a couple of different ways of showing you it here, but our overall mortality of, all the lambs that had strong iodine on the navels, whether that was dipped or sprayed, was 8.2%, and the NoBACZ navel groups was 6.5%. Now what that translates to is a 21% reduction in mortality in the navel group, or the NoBACZ navel group, versus the strong iodine group. And that, that's again here. So you can see the numbers here. We had 3,385 lambs treated with iodine and 282 losses. And you've got the same here. So 225 out of 3,455. Slight mismatch in the total numbers just because that's how it worked out in terms of the farms. So that 21% reduction, is really impressive, but it's also really strongly statistically significant. And this is one of those things we talk about in terms of when the statisticians apply all of their kind of processing and modelling to the data to tell us whether this is data that means something or whether this is data that, isn't particularly important. And when you put that into lambs on the ground terms, that difference is 18 more lambs in the NoBACZ group surviving to 8 weeks per 1,000 lambs born on farm. So I think even then, that number does hit particularly hard. Now, interestingly, when you looked at kind of when those mortality occurred, there was a really significant point where there was a difference in those NoBACZ navel lambs. So this circle here is the first 4 days of life. And what you'll see is here is the iodine is the orange line on the top and NoBACZ navel is on the bottom in the blue. And those 4 days, your iodine rates rose pretty significantly and pretty quickly. The NoBACZ navel was much slower to rise. Now, what NoBACZ navel isn't is a, silver bullet product that is going to fix everything and all issues that, we ever encounter in the lambing shed. That's not what you'll see in terms of results, but that's also not what anyone's claiming it is. Those first 4 days are where you can see a really key difference. And if you think back to those AHDB data from the beginning, half of all losses are within the first 48 hours of life for lambs born. So that's where we can have a really significant impact on our mortality. Now, there was another interesting thing that came out of this study in that it was the first one which sort of categorically proved that dipping is better than spraying. And I don't know what you've been told in the past, but I remember through uni and what I've always advised my clients since is that we've always said, dipping is probably best practice. It makes sense. You get better coverage over that umbilicus and, effectively it's a tube. So if you can make sure you're fully coating it, then, that's useful. And this study did come back and support that. So here again, we've got our percentage mortality in our lambs that had product sprayed versus product dipped. And again, just a breakdown of it here. So effectively, our overall mortality was 9.4% if a product was sprayed and 5.5% if a product was dipped. But interestingly, whether you were on a farm that was dipping or spraying, if you used NoBACZ navel, the mortality was still reduced versus using iodine. So if you were using spraying iodine before and you changed to spraying NoBACZ navel, you would still see a reduction in that mortality. And if anybody's seen the product, or you can see on the bottom image here, it does come with a spray cap that is, specifically designed for our product and this bottle. Because, some people, some setups, spraying works, and that's what they like to do. So let's put this into slightly more kind of practical, applicable on-farm figures. Here we've got our adjusted 56-day weights. So we know, from what we've just said, we had more lambs alive at 8 weeks. We had that 21% reduction in mortality, but actually we had heavier lambs. And what this study showed was that of all the lambs that had NoBACZ navel as a product treatment, they were on average 360 grams heavier at 8 weeks than the lambs that had iodine. And actually, like I said before, where we had those paired twins where one of the twin got NoBACZ and the other got iodine, there was an even more significant change. So there was an increase of 460 grams. So, just shy of half a kilo increased growth, effectively for free. You've not fed them anymore and you've not done anything any different apart from changed what you first treated them with on their navel when they were first born. Now, we know that the target, daily live weight gain for the UK is 250 grams a day. Studies show the average is probably more sitting around 100 to 150. So that is potentially a good few days that those lambs could get to that, finish point and potentially get off farm. So what does that mean, for your flock or for the flocks of your clients? We've said before, for every 100 lambs who got NoBACZ navel instead of iodine, studies show that you'd have 18 more lambs alive by 8 weeks. And you would also have 360 kilograms more lamb weight overall at 8 weeks. Now, we have done some figures on this as well. 18 more lambs alive. This data is based on the average SQQ between August 24 and July 25. So we updated this at the end of August this year. That would work out as just under 2.5 grand more in terms of that weight going off farm. And if you break that down, if you're a smaller flock, every 200 lambs, 3.6 lambs more alive, still an extra 500 quid. Obviously, this will change per year. The market has been kind to us fairly, but the results were similar for the 23-24 period, even though that pence per kilo price was different. So hopefully that has shown that, although depending where you buy your hygiene from, depending where you buy your NoBACZ from, it may well be slightly more expensive than what you're currently doing, but your average dose is 25 pence per dose. And hopefully that then shows that that's a really worthwhile investment for your farm. Now, the last thing I'll just cover in the last couple of minutes is something also that we looked at the study, and it wasn't one of the key focuses, but I think it is growing in terms of importance, and that's ear tagging and hygiene around ear tagging. We know that ear tagging enables bacteria to enter the body and potentially enter the bloodstream. And if we talk about things like joint ill particularly, we have our Streptococcus galactiae, which causes a lot of joint ill. And if you have a lamb that's contaminated with that and got that all over its skin, and you then pierce the ear and potentially expose the bloodstream to that bacteria, that's a really easy way for that bacteria to get in. So as I said before, the bottles do come with this spray attachment, and even if you are dipping your navels, that then means you can use that spray attachment when you are ear tagging. So as part of the study, we also asked them to either use NoBACZ navel on their ear tags if it was a NoBACZ navel lamb, or to use another disinfectant on the ear tag. And there were a few farms in that study who weren't used to doing anything on the ear tags and hadn't had a problem perceivably. But once they started seeing the difference and in response and in healing of the lambs that had the NoBACZ navel sprayed, a couple of them then moved across, even though it wasn't necessarily what we'd asked them to do. So ultimately, we need to consider, naval hygiene at every point, from when that lamb is first born to all the way through to the point of tagging in terms of enabling bacterial entry. We know that there are challenges on farm in terms of hygiene, and we know there's already going to be bacteria present, and actually there's not much we can do about a lot of that. But potentially this is a swap that for an awful lot of farms could be quite considerable in terms of the impact on lamb mortalities, on diseases that are then seen within the flock, and ultimately on the performance and productivity of that flock, just from one small switch at the beginning. That's everything from me there. So I will leave it there. This is our website, and we've got obviously time for questions at the end. I'll pass you back to Kevin.
Excellent, thank you, Emily. And it's good to see a good scientific trial backing up your good evidence backing up what you say. So well done for making the effort to do a good trial. There's plenty of questions there, or I know I've got some written down as well. So you might want to have a little read through them, and then just to prepare yourself, maybe
Not doing my prep.
a bit of cheating. But thank you very much. A very, very interesting product. But we'll move on to Bruce now, and then we'll come to all the questions at the end. Thank you for joining us, Bruce, and thank you for standing in last minute. It's very good of you. Bruce is a farmer from County, how do I say this bit?
Laois.
County Laois, in the Republic of Ireland. He sits on the board of Animal Health Ireland and is a consultant specialising in parasite management. He is the 8th generation on the family farm, having originally studied automobile engineering. He came home to farm after his father lost a lot of his herd to TB 23 years ago. Bruce decided to go home for a year and help out with the intention of going back to his engineering career, but never did. He fell in love with farming and has stayed at it since. He took over the farm in 2012. He was a Nuffield Scholar, and Bruce and I both share a little bit of common ground, and we're both ambassadors for SPARC, which is about sustainable parasite control in grazing ruminants, which is a European-wide initiative which is doing a lot of work throughout Europe to try and spread the message, very similar to SCOPS, but on a European scale. So thank you, Bruce, and I'll let you start trying to share your screen and start your presentation.
Thank you, folks. Is that working?
It's just coming through. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. So
Yeah.
thank you, Kevin, for the introduction, and everyone else for appearing here this evening. Yeah, I have to apologize for Nick's absence. I probably could have named my presentation. I can't believe it's not Nick. I have the Irish accent anyway, so we're heading in the right direction. So yeah, look, I suppose a little bit about myself. Kevin hit on some of it there. Who am I, or who do I think I am, as my dad would say? Engineer graduate, and I came home to the dairy farm. Well, it was a mixed farm at the time. We had dairy cows, we had cattle and sheep on the farm, and I got greedy and went down the line solely of dairying, and yeah, intensified the farm, bought land and converted land all into dairying. So we went from 54 cows up to 300. The relevance of that is with the intensity, we had an awful lot of animals in one group. So it's less groups of animals on the farm, in other words. So that came with health problems. So anthelmintic resistance was one of the issues that cropped up on the farm. And myself and my dad had we'll call it a mutual discussion with mutual passion on anthelmintic usage on our farm at a crush gate one day, and decided then to go and apply for a Nuffield Scholarship from that day to discover what options we had in front of us. So yeah, that got me as far as being a, hang on, this isn't actually working for me here. This should be moving, sorry. Apologies. There we go. Yeah, so yeah, that got me to the Nuffield Scholarship end, where I looked at the effects of anthelmintic resistance on herds and flocks, and I looked at the free living stages and the effects that anthelmintics had on biodiversity, and how biodiversity affected parasites on farms. So it was very hard to put that all into one title. I still really haven't got to grasp on that end of it. But it took me to different parts of the world to look at anthelmintic resistance and biological control systems on them. So with that, then I became a member of the farmer representative on the cows working group, and as with Kevin there, the Spark Ambassador, which is a European-wide initiative that Kevin was talking about. In my own country then, Animal Health Ireland Technical Working Group on Parasites, which is basically the same as cows. Do a small bit of parasite and consultancy then for farmers and vets. And just for laughs then, I went and did a diploma in climate change, the environment and agriculture. So yeah, who am I? Well, if I was to see that, I would say I'm a dork. So look, to look at anthelmintic resistance and control measures as my Nuffield Scholarship, this is the first diagram we all come across when we look at the life cycle of parasites. And we're all well used to looking at it, but it's important to point out that each stage on this cycle is critical for the parasites, not just important, but critical. As an industry, we're always looking at the top diagram, which is the animal. We focus on the animal. So look, I decided to maybe look at the free living stages. Two things became clear to me quite quickly, that we refer to parasites on farms, and what we're doing with parasites is parasite control. But really, we're not controlling parasites. If we were, we would have gotten rid of them years ago. So we have to change that rhetoric, that we are managing parasites on farms. And whenever we ask a farmer what does he do about parasites on his farm, the first thing that we'll talk about is which wormer they're using and when. and that's really where the focus is. So that means that we're way over reliant on products. So that was been fine. We've had 3 generations of it on my farm that we were using these products, and they're working away 100%. But up until now, so why do we need to change? Well, there's environmental reasons. Trinity College in Dublin did a trial a few years ago, and they tested groundwater and surface water for anthelmintic residuals, and they found residuals of anthelmintics in 22% of the sites that they were testing across Ireland, which is quite alarming. With benzimidazole, that's your white wormer, being the most prolific one. Yeah, look, these products have unintended consequences. They reduce the populations and the mass of invertebrates that are associated with this, using the dung pats as a food source. Gillian Gilbert in the Isle of Islay, she's with the RSPB. She linked the use of triclobendazole, which is your fluke product, and synthetic pyretides, so your fly control products that were being used on sheep, with a decline in the chuff bird. The reason being that the chuff is a wading bird, and it eats larvae out of dung pats. The problem with using these products is that when they're used on sheep, they don't just disappear once they go into the animal, so they stay persistent in the dung pat and the droppings after they've been used for up to 30 days after they've been used. They're still causing problems to invertebrates in the dung pats. So that over a period of time reduces the available food source for the chuff bird, and they don't get up to the target weight then coming into the winter. And yeah, they don't get up to mating at their specific age. Another reason, consumer sentiment. We saw with Bovaer how the trial work was being pulled on it in spite of all the scientific data showing that it was a very safe product, and it was a miracle product in terms of being able to reduce methane coming out of large ruminants. But with consumer sentiment saying they didn't want this, then it got pulled on us. So consumers don't want to see us using new products in animals that they're concerned about. So that's really important. Science and consumer sentiment are they're at odds with each other at times, but consumer sentiment will win over science. So we have to be very careful what we're actually using. So if we don't have to use it, we shouldn't. Another reason then, I'm sure there's a lot of the audience here are well up to speed on resistance. Yeah, resistant. Look, we've only a number of products, and when they're working 100%, that's brilliant. We use our wormer, and it's very satisfying to see animals immediately starting to put on weight again and perform better. That effect really happens until the wormer gets down to about 50% useful. So in other words, if we had 100 worms in our animal, we worm it, and we only end up with 50, then we will see an immediate response to using the product, but it doesn't actually mean that it's worked properly. We have a threshold of 95%. So normally, or in proper working circumstances, when we worm animals, we should be killing about 95% of the worms that are in the animal, and only left with 5%. When we get below that threshold, resistance is deemed to be there, and for every time we use a wormer after that figure will as a trend reduce down to the point that they can actually be 0% effective. I've seen cases where there was fecal egg counts done on calves, and they were wormed, and a follow-up test was done to see how well the wormer worked, and the actual egg count increased after usage. So it basically, they might as well have been worming them with water. But you can see here in the picture, on the left you have two sheep, one over the other, two ewes there that have three susceptible worms and one resistant worm. Now, if you don't treat the animal, top right, you end up with susceptible worms out on grassland. So that means that those worms that are out on grassland will be affected whenever they come in contact, or when their offspring come in contact with a wormer. In the bottom case where they're treated, you can see what is happening there. So you have to remember that all animals are carrying parasites. We're all carrying parasites. If we don't need to worm an animal, then we really shouldn't be doing it, because we're taking away the opportunity of that wormer actually working in future. So it's just to be very careful, that with old trains of thoughts that if we worm our animals, we're going to clean up the farm. We're going to clean up contamination in pasture. According to Chagas, antibiotic resistance is the #1 challenge facing lamb production in Ireland in future. So it's a very serious event that's coming up in front of us. Last year, Chagas tested 18 flocks for resistance. On those 18 flocks, 16% of them, 16% of the tests showed resistance to clear, 17% showed resistance to yellow wormers, and 100% showed resistance to white wormers. So they were all resistant to your benzimidazoles. Now, at this point, I'm going to stop bashing wormers. I'm going to put away my hemp underpants, and I'm going to stop smoking rollies, because I do sound a bit hippyish. I know on the right ears, this is music to some people's ears. I'm a big fan of antibiotics, to be honest. They are really important for our animal welfare going forward. They're a miracle medicine, really, but we should treat them as a medicine and not just a management tool. We have to, we have 5 products for sheep, and we have to protect every one of them to make sure that every time we use them, that we need to use them, that they're going to work. So look, resistance is increasing. It's on a lot of farms. Most farms that have resistance don't even know about it. We need to, when we're talking about wormer groups, we need to get educated on which ones are actually which, and not swapping from one brand to another. So yeah, look, there's 2 kind of areas that broke into the free living stages into, and that's the infective larvae stage. So what was circled here is when the larvae have hatched and gone onto grassland. What can we do in this area to reduce disease in our animals? So if you look, is this zooming in for you? I'll take it at his.
Yeah, you good.
Good stuff. This trial was done on lambs. Maybe some of you have already seen this. The bottom group are a group of lambs that were exposed to 5,000 larvae per day ingested, and you can see their weight gain was the lowest out of the 4 groups, which is obvious. What's not so obvious is the difference between group 2 and group 3. So group 2 were exposed to 5,000 larvae per day, but they were also wormed once every 3 weeks. The effect of this is, on a farmer might think that he's protecting his animals by worming them, but you can see here between that group and the group that were given 1,000 larvae per day and not wormed, those ones actually perform better than the ones that were consistently wormed. So your Epidos boluses, those sort of products, are not going to save you from a missed opportunity in terms of performance. So your lamb performance could be way better if the parasites were at a low, or as you can see in the top line, 0 in control. So that's their potential. So we're losing potential there basically by putting animals out onto wormy pasture and using wormers to control the issue. And I suppose it's important to point out then where this exposure comes from. And you can see the green spike, that shows the larvae on pasture. So they're the infective stage larvae. Now if you reverse back, you can see the dark green and the light green, the dark blue and the light blue are where the eggs actually come from. So the light blue eggs, they're from lambs that come either from the late previous season or a spike in June after weaning. So those turn into effective stage larvae that are available there on pasture. But I suppose what I really want to show to you is the dark blue line, and that is the yow's fecal egg output, which is way lower than the lambs. And this is very relevant, and we'll come back to why this is relevant in a while. But it's important just to remember where these eggs are actually coming from, and where they're actually sitting then on pasture. So there is our grass plant, our perennial ryegrass plant, which is the staple diet of ruminants in Western Europe. This is a perfect ground for parasites. It's nice and damp and wet, and it's leafy, and it's easy to climb, and it keeps moisture down in the base. But you can see that by a long shot the parasites are down in the bottom 5 centimeters of grass. So forcing susceptible animals to graze out pasture really tight on pasture that has a large contamination is a high risk factor in comparison to doing the exact opposite. So how do we mitigate these issues? Well, traffic light grazing is one way of mapping the pastures in terms of the risk. So mapping the risk with each grazing event. Our lambs that are maybe just after being weaned from about 10 weeks up to 14 weeks of age, those guys are going to start putting out a huge volume of eggs out of the back end. So if we mark the pasture behind them orange as they graze it on a map, we know that that's a medium risk. Now we want to be doing a fecal egg count on these animals as they're moving around the farm. If they have a medium to low fecal egg count, then we will map this pasture as being orange. We don't want to be putting these lambs back onto this pasture in that year if we can at all avoid it, particularly in the early half of the season. If we go above a threshold for fecal egg counts that we're not happy with, or that we need to start worming, we mark that pasture as being red, and any pasture leading up to when we done that fecal egg count. We really need to stay away from that pasture for the rest of that year. We also need to know a bit about speciation. So, if we're talking about maybe nematodirus, we want to mark that pasture, and you can see on the top right here, I robbed this off of Kevin's website, the SCOPS forecast. This is a really good tool to use. If we know we've put out a good few eggs, nematodirus eggs, onto a pasture, we can use this forecast for the next year to consider not grazing this pasture with lambs, keeping them off of it for in around the risk period. So it's important to know what parasites we're actually dealing with. So we need to watch our forecasts and clean. How do we clean our pasture then? Well, we use hoovers, and a hoover is, we can cut silage. We can use, I was show that I'll bring back the relevance now of the egg output of the yolks. The yolks can actually ingest larvae and put out a very low count of eggs onto pasture. So we need to think of next year's lambs this year. Right now, we need to be thinking of where our lambs are going to go when we put them out of the shed, or after they've lambed next spring. So we need to have low contaminated pasture. So cleaning out pasture now for next spring. That's our basis of traffic light grazing. And I will get back to another hoover in a minute that is relevant. When we do dose, so it's the right time. So we have to use our diagnosis, and don't put all our eggs in one basket. We can't just use fecal egg counts. It's a very good tool to use, but it's not the holy grail of diagnosis. The problems with FECs are you get into there's loads of other factors that can cause disease while you'd have a median egg output. A danger zone to have I counted a danger zone for egg counts is between about 300 and about 700, because if it's hovering there all year and the weather's good, the animals are thriving, they're putting on weight, you haven't really got an issue. But if you do one egg count and it's 500 and you don't do another egg count for a long time because you think it's okay, well, it could be too late by the time you actually get a count in. There can be a false sense of security with them. You can also get very varied results, particularly if you're pooling samples in terms of egg counts. So you need to be doing it consistently, working on a program on your farm, and looking at other factors, stress factors, weather, grass quality, weaning, any of those events that can cause stress in conjunction with your FEC. Yeah, DAG scoring then is another part of diagnosis. Look, if you've got loads of dirty DAGs in your sheep, and you have a median kind of a fecal egg count, then I would consider probably having to go in worming at that stage. Blood testing lambs for liver fluke is a great tool as well. If your lambs are negative on their blood, the yolks are going to be negative. But as soon as they start rising, they've come in contact with liver fluke. So at that point, you can go and worm you can fluke your yolks at that point. It is the problem with liver fluke is the yolks don't develop an immunity to liver fluke. They're either born with it or they either have it or don't have it, the immunity to it, whereas they do with other likes in the nematodirus or round stomach worms. They build up an immunity to those, but they don't with liver fluke. That's a genetic trait. The right product then. So you need to know what species you're targeting, and don't use a combination wormer if you're not targeting a combination. So if you're not looking to fluke animals, but you need to use a wormer, then don't use a combination wormer and flukicide. Yeah, and know the resistance status. So if you're resistant to one strain of parasite and you're encountering another, then use a different product, saving a product later on that will work on the parasite that you're resistant to. So it's important to do reduction tests. So post-drench test, talk to your vet about that one. Yeah, so the right amount then, you need to know your weights. A weighing scales is a must. And calibrate the equipment. Just because it says 10 mils doesn't mean it's giving out 10 mils. The right animal refugia. So 80% of the parasites are in 20% of your animals. So as an industry, we probably need to be worming our animals more often, but less animals, an awful lot less animals. We just have probably a few problem animals in our flocks that are causing the trouble. So we need to figure out which ones they are. So targeted selective approach brings us in there. So that's where you weigh your lambs consistently, and by setting a threshold then of what their weight gain should be. Each farmer needs to do that on their individual basis, but somewhere between 200 and 300. If you find you have a highish egg count and you start worming, go through the flock, and if your lambs are below your threshold, then those ones can be wormed. The ones that are thriving, no need to worm them, and that will give you your refugia then as well. What is refugia? Refugia is keeping a safe refuge of susceptible parasites on your farm. So they will be in the stomachs of the animals that are thriving well, that don't need to be wormed. And where do you move them after that? The old advice was to dose and move to a clean pasture. The problem with that is they're going out onto clean pasture and not ingesting any worms. So the issue there is that you're increasing the percentage of resistant genes of parasites that are in the sheep, and then that in turn leads it out onto pasture. So you need to move them to a wormy paddock, or just leave them in the paddock that they're on for a period of time till they ingest enough worms to water down, in effect, the genes of the susceptible, or sorry, the resistant parasites. Quarantine drench, it's something that we really need to be at. The resistant parasites, or any parasite, doesn't hop out of one field and into another. They have to be moved with animals. So it's the only way they can move around. So when we're bringing in sheep from another flock, or we're bringing them from an out farmer down from hills, we should really be giving them a quarantine drench. The quarantine drench is using one of our new products, our type 5 and 6, orange or purples, or we could use a combination of yellows and whites, not together at the same time, but yeah, just if they're resistant to one strain, then we'll hit them with another one. This I like to call the napalm approach. So we've gone full circle here now. I was telling you not to use wormers, now I'm telling you to use loads of wormers. But it is really important not to bring these resistant genes into our grassland. Preferably keep the animals indoors when you're doing them. And I did say another Hoover. Theoretically, there should be no eggs coming out the back of these sheep when they come into our onto our grassland. So you can actually use these sheep now to clean up land for lambs for next spring. So these will ingest infective stage larvae and put out no eggs out the back of them. So for about 24 days, you will see nothing coming out the back of them after being wormed. So look, I suppose this is probably where I'm famous for, is this stage of the free living stages, which is the egg stage, and how we can reduce these on pasture. So these eggs hatch and they swim out of the dung pats and they get onto grassland, and that's when they get into the infective stage. But they have to hatch and swim out of dung pat, which is a perfect breeding ground for parasites. Now it's moist, it's wet, it's full of carbon, it's sheltered, which makes it a perfect food source for loads of creatures who are also competing with each other and with the parasites. So all these insects will consume, drink, move, and bury this product into the soil. The problem is when we're using these wormers, we're killing them. So if we don't need to use them, we really shouldn't be. The one I was really concentrating on was the dung beetle, which I'll come back to in a second, but this is our chuff bird eating some of these larvae it's finding in the dung pat. So this is how the products can affect biodiversity. This is a fox scat, and I probably shouldn't be promoting fox scats to an audience of sheep farmers, but you can see in this fox scat, it is full of shells off of these are the elytra, which is the covers over the wings of dung beetles. So this I found on my own farm. So they will dig through the dung pat, moving it around and pulling out these dung beetles out of it. So in the UK, we have two different types of dung beetles. We have dwellers and tunnelers, not the rollers. We don't have them in this part of the world. The benefits to farmers then, they reduce parasites and flies. They do this by drinking drinking the dung pats. The dung pat is mainly liquid, so they will drink it, and this doesn't bode well with parasites that are trying to hatch and swim out onto grassland. The migration is reduced. Nutrient recycling, they're quicker at the dung pats are brought into the soil much quicker right of where the grass roots are, with the dung beetles present. The tunnelers then, they can bore right down to about 1 meter deep into the soil, and this reduces the density of the soil and lets air into it. We've no problem spending money on subsoilers, but we have these little creatures ready to do it for free, same as your earthworm. Reduce pasture fouling, so they can remove dung pats from pasture much quicker, which gives an opportunity for grass to grow. In drying out the dung pat, the earthworms actually take into it much quicker and put it into the soil. Really, at the end of the day, it's the earthworms that mix the dung pat up with the soil. So the dung beetles really help them. The two work together. Dung beetles then also carry little mites on their bellies that are very good for phoretic mites, is what we call them. They decompose dead bodies. So we'll eventually all know about phoretic mites at some stage. But they're also known for eating, are reputed to eat parasite eggs in dung pats. So they will reduce them. And benefits to the environment then, you have less of a risk of runoff going into waterways, and they're also an important food source for predators. So these are just a couple of small pictures I have just to finish up then in terms of where we're breeding them on our own farm. This was mass rearing that we did, where we caught dung beetles and mass reared them and re-released them back out onto our own farm. So you can see, if you actually look here, these are some of the beetles we have, and you can see those little mites crawling all over them. So they're the guys that do a lot of good, but they can't migrate from one pat to another without the help from these dung beetles. So here was some of the trapping we were doing with the beetles. So yeah, that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour of integrated parasite management. I can't believe it's not Nick Cotter. Yeah, so yeah, that's me, and any questions there, I'd be happy to take them when we're due to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruce. That's a nifty little buggy you got there too.
Yeah, it's been reputed to being a pregnant roller skate.
Very good. I've often said that we farm parasites as well as sheep, and it's about looking after the good parasites and the ones we want around, and not the ones we don't. And yes, you backed that up great there with some great information, and thank you for adapting it for the sheep audience as well. And I'm sure that might encourage people to go and read your Nuffield as well. We've got some questions going. Whilst you're still in the hot seat, Bruce, I'll ask you a couple, and then we'll come over to Emily afterwards. So Feel free to chip in as well, Emily, on parasites. I know you're an expert in them as well. Will worms become susceptible again to wormers if sheep aren't treated, or if sheep are removed from the land? Bruce.
So is the question asking, are resistant parasites going to become susceptible? Not, the experience says no. Once down in Tasmania, they had they tried keeping sheep off of land for a long period of time, and then reintroducing susceptible parasites back onto the land, but they got resistance back onto that land again very quickly, which was very surprised to hear. So I don't know why that was, whether the eggs were actually lasting that long in the soil, but we're looking at a period of over about 12 years, and it was still an issue.
And that's why it's so important, isn't it, to not get it in the first place, because there's not really a way out once it happens. And is there any suggestion for fields where access only allows sheep grazing due to inaccessibility for cows or to silage? How can you try and reduce parasite burdens resistance here, where sheep have grazed every summer for years? This is a problem with a lot of sheep systems on marginal land, and we're just grazing permanent pasture.
Yeah, it's becoming a reoccurring problem, because farmers are getting more specialized now. So we don't all have alternating. But there are options like where you might not be able to mow it or cut silage off it. We have options there in terms of alternating ewes that have a very, very low egg count with lambs that would have a high one. Crops then, like forage crops, are another option to use as well. And spelling long periods of time as well. And I don't want to suggest it because it's really laborious, but on-off grazing is another option, where you graze for a short extended period of time and remove them from it. So that's another option. But there are options there.
Emily, you got any comments on any of your clients on how they cope down on the?
It is hard. I think some of it comes down to the resilience and finding those animals within your flock, as we said, with the ewes who are able to cope with that better and trying to stay off it for as long as we can. But as Bruce said, with the way our weather's going, that's getting harder and harder.
Just that leader follower sort of rotation can help a bit, can't it? And it's great, your idea of the map, and just really being aware of the risks around your farm and where you can put stuff. And Michelle wanted to know how you mass produced your dung beetles.
Yeah, look, I suppose the theory of it is that when dung beetles or when any insect, in fact, doesn't have a big competition in terms of a mate or feed, they don't produce as many eggs and they don't mate as much. So you have to kind of replicate the opposite of that effect in a very tight and closed area. So you put a lot of dung beetles of the one species into a tight area and fool them into thinking that there's a shortage of food as well, and then they produce a lot more eggs, and it has to be a very clinical type of environment. So I suppose really you're turning a dung pat from being Butlins into Glastonbury. So that's really what you're trying to do.
Yeah, you and Robert Howard are setting out to make the beetles cute again, I think. I'm going to head over to you now, Emily. Some here saying that, as Barbara said, we found iodine can cause issues with over drying the umbilical cord and too much and can burn. I assume you don't get burning with your product?
Yeah, so it's got the ethanol component for that sort of instant cleansing, but we know that the iodine can be pretty nasty on human skin and on sheep skin. We have had a few people asking, is there an issue with it drying too quickly, which isn't something that, with all the however many thousand lambs that have had it now, that's not something that we've seen as a concern. There's not really a known issue with drying something too quickly, it's not going to draw moisture out of the body or anything.
There's a few interesting questions about the ear tagging, and do you dip the tag or do you dip the ear?
Yeah, so I mean the best practice would be spraying the ear where you're going to tag it, and then spraying the tag. So it can be quite quickly. You've got the lamb, you've got the tag, and you just do a squirt and a squirt. And it's probably something that a lot of people, and I know certainly a lot of our clients, hadn't been thinking about doing. But we do know it's another entry point for bacteria, and if we can possibly reduce a nasty joint ill getting in and not have that knobbly lamb trying to get off farm at the end of it, that's ideal.
In your figures with your mortality, did you identify what those mortalities were? Was there a spike in a specific thing? And also with the extra gain in weight, could you actually pinpoint where that came from, or was it just unintended consequence?
Yeah, the mortality thing is hard. Obviously, we were hoping to have full data for 7,000 lambs. We had about 25%. We knew why they had, and there wasn't really any key correlation in terms of seeing one disease versus the other. What we do know was that initial 4 days you had the reduction in the mortality. So that would be your classic sort of septicemia, your watery mouth, your navel ill, and that bacteria getting into the system. You're not often going to see deaths from joint ill within 4 days of birth. The growth rates, it wasn't aligned back to a particular incident or something, but the theory is that if the body is just being challenged by fewer bacteria, all of the energy and intakes are going into growth rather than having to fight as an immune system, and just lambs just doing a lot better.
All right, and there's some questions about will it be available in larger containers? So you're obviously winning some people over.
Yeah, so obviously it launched spring 24. 25 was the big year, and we only had the 500 mils. 1st of October, it launched in 1 litre tins. So these are metal sort of decant tins, where we are quite new. Every time we change into a new product size, we have to go back and do all the stability testing again to know that it's going to be lasting on farm. So there is continual push from our end as well, because purely from a price point of view, moving from the 500 ml to the 1 litre dropped that price point down by 6p per application. So it is worth it for everybody. So we're getting there. But the 1 litres do exist. So wherever you buy it from, you should be able to get them.
Yeah. And someone's asked what the ideal age you'd recommend tagging the lamb is, whether that's just with NoBACZ or with in general. But any views on that?
I mean, the vet in me who would like some data on everything would tell me as soon as you possibly can. That's not going to stress the lamb out or mess up the mothering, and that's why we had that inclusion criteria of needing to tag within 48 hours, so we knew what was happening. And that, I know that's not feasible for everybody, but from we need data to be able to manage ourselves better.
I think it's just some people worry about doing it too early for joint ill, don't they? But others need to do it for record.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
and arguably, if you're going to do it later on, potentially you've got much bigger vessels, and those are the lambs you really don't want to be losing when you've got a nice fit healthy thing. So it's not just the neonates for the spraying and the tagging. We've got people who just use it for the ear tags rather than the navel.
Yeah. Another one for you, Bruce. Should we chain harrow more after grazing to break up the dung to disperse the larvae?
Well, I call it recreational diesel burning, but yeah, it would help. The issue is your insects that would be competing with the larvae in the pats don't like it when you do that. So I think it's an elaborate way of doing it, but chickens is another option I've heard being used as well, which are quite good. Yeah, it's not something I'd be advocating.
It's another job to do. Then you got to shut the chickens
exactly.
Don't graze your sheep after you've had chickens on there, please. It makes for unhappy vets.
Yeah. And can you say a bit more about your catching and your breeding dung beetles? Which obviously caught people's imagination here.
Okay, right. Well, yeah, that gets a lot of interest. So, what I will say is, if you had a river that had a depleted number of fish in it because it was being polluted, you wouldn't breed more fish and release them into it. You would have to solve the problem first. So effectively, there should be enough of a population of insects and dung beetles on your farm naturally occurring. If there's not, I'd be asking questions why. But that's not fobbing off the question. Doing it, yeah, look, there's different species for different times of the years. And I've caught some on different farms to bring into my own as well, just to keep it interesting. Catching them, you have to look at topography, wind direction, where animals are, and what land usage is been around the area. So that's the long and short of it, I suppose. Look, it gets very complex, but I could spend 2 hours talking about it here. But that's
you're
the
not
run of it.
obsessed about it at all, are you?
No.
All right. And there's another good question about how you measure the number of free living larvae. If only we could, that would be the ideal situation, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. You can only assume it. Now, you can measure them, but it's an absolute ball ache to actually do it. So it's not an effective way of doing it. But look, I suppose the SCOPS nematovirus forecast is a really good, and that's based off of data coming back in from labs, etc., and weather modeling. And look, we can assume the same by using fecal egg counts as well. What contamination we're putting out onto pasture. Yeah, that's that.
Emily, I'm going to give you a worm question now, just to test your knowledge. How long would you have to keep bought-in ewe lambs indoors whilst you quarantine worm them?
Ideally, minimum 48 hours. It's somewhere, we're talking now between sort of 2 to 5 to 7 days. Enough time for that to get through it. And ideally, if you can do that on concrete or housed somewhere, or have a sacrificial bit of pasture that nothing else goes in. I'm really glad you highlighted that, Bruce, because it's absolutely gutting when you've had a farm that's brought in a horrible worm problem because you're just stuck with it. Yeah,
and it can change your whole business for the rest of your farming time, really, and you're dealing with what you bought in, do you? And keep them away from each other for at least 21 days once they have gone out. But, the move to rotational grazing to grow and utilise more grass for sheep production has the potential to lead to increased ingestion of worms grazing close to the soil. How can we have our cake and eat it on a sheep-only farm? Wow. I could probably answer this one too. It's a challenge, and it's a challenge to try and do the right things and to use as little as possible and keep grazing your permanent pastures round and round. And you often feel like you're on a knife edge, and it's not easy, but you've got to try and do the best you can to protect your flock from parasites in the future. I don't know if either of you want to add to it, but there's no easy way. I think if we could get to a stage where we could reliably get a cost-effective way of speciating worms and knowing which products work best on species, that would be wonderful, wouldn't it? And we'd know exactly when and where to treat different things. But there's a long way to go before we can all analyse that sensibly and responsibly and make the right decisions from it.
Yeah, I can't really add much to that, I'm afraid. But I think with rotational grazing, we have more options there as well. Like I suppose it's with rotational grazing, we're probably looking at higher stocking rates, generally speaking, which is probably lending more into the more contamination and pasture. But with rotational grazing, we have options there as well. The old adage of grow it in 3 weeks and eat it in 3 days. If we're back fencing, it's a massive help. Not leaving animals on land that they were grazing 2 weeks ago. Really keep them moved on, and yeah, really taking rotational grazing to the extreme. So you start using different species, different age of lamb, the age of sheep, and different crops, that we can, help ourselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, look, I think at the end of the day, it's stocking rates really is the issue.
Yeah. And will changing the pH or adding lime help with worms or dung beetles?
Not that I'm aware of. I've never. I have been asked that before. I've never come across that in any way in that regard. Yeah, no.
I knew it would raise its head at some stage. We're now seeing more and more homuncus. We don't buy stock in, but we think it's coming from wildlife. Is there anything we can do to help control it? We don't routinely use wormers and have used Closental to treat homuncus based on Famacha scores and are changing our grazing each year. But is vaccination the only way forward? Well, Ella, I hope you've got your vet involved in a lot of these decisions. I think we should go to the vet first and then we'll come to Bruce. But
yeah, it's hard. I've worked in the south of the UK and it used to just be an us problem, but we now see cases as far north as you can go. I'll do a shout out for the various better sources of information in terms of SCOPs. There's been a couple of really good podcasts on there. There's a lot of talk about it lately. Do talk to your vet. Homuncus is one of those ones where things like your Famacha scoring and keeping an eye on the condition are equally, if not more important than just those fecal egg counts. We know there is a vaccine available down under. Whether it's commercially viable, not sure for a lot of farms. I do know some farms on the Isle of Wight who are using it because they were seeing really high losses, but do have a chat to your vet and try and get something that's more specific to your farm and your stock.
And anything, Bruce?
Not really to add to that, but I think a proper diagnosis would be the first place to start on it anyway.
Yeah, and the presence of homuncus isn't necessarily a diagnosis for homuncosis. So you might have homuncus there, but it doesn't mean you're going to get homuncosis. So yeah, regular flock and health advice. We're running out of time. It's been a pleasure to share the screen with you both and to be part of this first evening of SHWAP, as they call it, and I'm sure the next two nights will be a great success as well. If we haven't managed to answer any of your questions, then I'm sure if you reach out to either Bruce or Emily, I'm sure you can find them on social media somewhere. If you reach out to them, I'm sure they can and help you more. Can I just ask you, please, as well, to put your membership number for AMTRA and Rosa in again, just to prove you're still here. I'd like to thank everyone. Bruce, Emily, I thank you. I'd like to thank the NSA, people in the background there. We've got Katie and Jan and Susie and everyone at HQ for putting tonight on. The NSA, I'm sorry, I'm going to bang the NSA drum, is a fabulous organisation, association that is putting sheep farmers first. Flock health, business, politics, it's there fighting your corner, and it can only do it with your help and your donation. So please, if you're not a member, can I urge you to join and take a good look at the website and see what we do and what we're about. Big thank you again to our sponsors, NoBACZ, British Wool, Rapper, Elanco, MSD, Bimeda and Livestock. And a quick plug for Rosa. I don't know if Katie's got a slide there, which is a register of sheep advisors, which is an NSA initiative to do a registry for sheep advisors. There's a map so you can find advisors in your area, and some of those, they might just be in one area, but they will do nationwide as well. So if you're looking for a good flock advisor, go on there. And also you've got things like the Sheep Vet Society that can really lead you to a good sheep vet. So our time is up. I apologize if I've forgotten something or forgotten to thank someone, but a very enjoyable evening. Thank you very much, everyone. And I look forward to seeing what comes tomorrow evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much all. Cheers, Kevin.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thank you.